I'm Melissa Weinman, and I'm a professional artist living in Tacoma, Washington, and I'm here at the Tacoma Art Museum, where I've been given the wonderful privilege of making a master copy. A master copy is where I get to study an original painting by standing in front of it and painting it. And today, I'm working on Clyde Aspovic's painting, On the Way to Heaven. I came to the Art Museum to see the Haub collection, and I was delighted to see that they had 3 Clyde Aspovic paintings. I've been studying Clyde Aspovic's paintings, but only in reproduction for several years now. And when I saw that they had 3 paintings in the collection, I immediately just thought, I want to study these up close and personal. Clyde Aspovic's paintings are so beautiful to me. They're beautifully atmospheric. It doesn't matter what time of day or what season he's painting, or whether he's painting a deep space or something sort of up close, outdoors, whether it's, like just weeds or flowers in the grass or something. Every single painting just feels saturated with atmosphere, and I wanted to learn how to do that. I'm a figurative painter, but oftentimes I paint figures in the landscape, and so I took it upon myself several years ago to do a self-study in landscape painting, and Clyde Aspovic is one of the artists that I was studying. It's really wonderful that in this day and age of digital reproduction that we have access to so many amazing paintings. We can go and look at almost whole museum collections online, right? But no matter how good the reproduction and how far you zoom in, you never know if you're really going to get a reproduction that's faithful to the color. But then there's also a kind of vicarious experience when you're really looking at the paint that you have, especially if you're a painter looking at a painting. When you're in the presence of the real thing, there's so much to see. And believe it or not, even though it's a 2-dimensional kind of image, there's a 3-dimensionality to the paint that I don't think comes across in reproduction. I knew that what I had to do is I had to start up here at the top of the painting where the most neutral palette was going to be, and try and establish those colors and those value ranges, and then work my way down the painting where I could then start to kick up the value contrast and the saturation of the colors. It was a good move, because what I realized when I started mixing up the colors for the top third of this painting, they were incredibly neutralized. I knew that the sky was cobalt blue with white, but I was shocked at how much Van Dyke brown, which is like a black brown, I had to put into that blue to get it to match this color. And I still think in my study, I'm not quite there. I need to neutralize it maybe a little bit more. At the beginning of day 2, I had to repaint this whole region in my study because it was still too saturated. So a master study is also really valuable because even if you're working from reproduction, it's one thing to sort of look at the painting and decode it, if you can, for color and composition and all those sorts of things. But once you have to really make that color and you have to make those brush strokes, it's an entirely different sort of game. One of the reasons that I wanted to study this painting is it has a very complex composition. It creates this extraordinary feeling that you're elevated somehow, and even though you're elevated, you have this sense of this massive mountain. So what I've learned is that Aspavik has created this unusual composition where instead of looking out over the landscape, which is what we normally do, and because we're looking out over the landscape and we're not that tall, the horizon line is usually very low in the composition, right? But Aspavik has put the horizon line somewhere right in this region. And I say this because he's created the illusion that we're looking down at the bottom half of the composition, right? Which makes us feel like we're elevated, and we're looking up at the top half of the composition. So it's as if we're suspended somehow in midair. And if you look at the bottom of the painting, you can't see the ground on which you're standing. So it's as if we're on a ridge, sort of looking across this meadow, if you will, up over to the other side, and then our eye follows a visual path that he's created up to the top. In this composition, he also has to create a tremendous amount of space. But it's kind of odd because instead of having a plane that's sort of flowing out and away from the viewer, this is an inclined plane, and it's a rather steep inclined plane. So how is he going to create this dramatic illusion of space without any kind of linear perspective? He's going to use aerial perspective. So a lot of what I've been doing is I've been studying his palette. In order to create an illusion of space using aerial perspective, you need to gradually neutralize the colors as they go back into the distance, and you also need to close the value range as you go back into the distance. So in the foreground, you see really bright light values against really dark values, but as you move into the middle range, that value contrast diminishes. He's working really hard to create this visual path so that your eye can traverse this space in some kind of organized fashion. Nature doesn't present itself to you completely composed. I mean, you can walk around with your frame and kind of find something beautiful to paint, but then you have to decide how to crop it. Where are the edges of the paintings? Where are they going to be? Why did Clyde choose to cut the painting off here, right, instead of moving the whole scene over? Well, one of the reasons I think is because he wanted to include these sheer cliffs dropping off into these deep spaces in order to enhance the feeling of elevation. If this were just terrain all the way to the edges, I don't think the sensation of being elevated up high somewhere in here would be as strong. Essentially, he's showing us the cliffs that we're standing on, only we're, they're right below us where we can't see them. So he's like an editor. He's selecting the things that are presenting themselves to him in nature strategically in order to create a certain kind of viewing experience. And then the other thing is once you decide sort of where you're going to crop it, how are you going to lead the viewer into that space and through it? Is there a neat little trail that you can follow up here in the mountainside? No, there's no river, there's no road, there's no little chain of fence posts that sometimes artists use. So he has got to move things into place, and I'm pretty sure that he does this in order to strategically get your eye to move in certain directions so that we do have a path to follow. For instance, the starting point. Notice that he chose to crop this really bright boulder off the bottom on the left-hand side. And I think he was smart to choose the left-hand side because generally we tend to read paintings from left to right. So I find that I start here and I follow these illuminated rocks into these meadows. And of course, I'm not really going up these rocks. They're kind of forming a kind of canyon wall, if you will, so that you can keep meandering up through the meadows as if we're having this vicarious experience of making this hike on the way to heaven, right? And we go up through these meadows here, and each time there's a wall of trees or a wall of rocks that's creating a kind of like canyon to guide our experience along this visual path. So then we get to this middle ground meadow, and there's another wall of rocks here and another wall of trees, and we go in between them, and then we follow up this meadow, again, a wall of rocks on this side and an abyss on this side, right? And up we go, and I think, you could sort of take this path, but I tend to follow the light and find my way up to this peak where I'm imagining I stand and I look over into yet another mountain range that he's shown that is overlapped by this peak beyond, suggesting even more space. When you get to the top, here's a plane that's slightly inclined toward you. This is interesting in a spatial composition where these planes are going this way, the cloud goes this way, and where they intersect is your arrival point. It's your stopping point. I loved coming to the Tacoma Art Museum and having this privilege. I loved that other people valued what I valued. The staff here have been incredibly supportive. They were very interested in what I wanted to do and saw the value in it, and they made things happen for me so that I could do this. And that's really wonderful.